There are people who never raise their voice, never defend themselves, never fight back even when they're breaking inside. They're not weak, they're not passive. Their silence holds a story, and a psychology darker than anyone realizes. There is a certain kind of person who never argues back. They don't yell when they're hurt. They don't fight when they're misunderstood. And they don't defend themselves even when they're right. They simply go quiet. They withdraw into themselves, like a tide pulling away from the shore. To the outside world, this silence looks like indifference, a lack of emotion, a calm personality. But the truth is far more complex. Their silence is not emptiness, it's containment, not weakness, self-preservation, not surrender. To understand people who don't argue back, you must first understand the battles they've already fought. These people learned long ago that raising their voice only makes things worse. Maybe they grew up in homes where arguing meant danger, where expressing pain led to punishment, where speaking their truth made them the villain. Maybe they learned early that silence was safer than honesty. Maybe their childhood taught them that peace was something you protected even if you had to sacrifice your own voice to keep it alive. People who don't argue back never learned how to be loud. They learned how to survive. They learned how to observe the world carefully, calculating every reaction before it happens. They learned how to shrink themselves so conflict wouldn't find them. They became experts in reading tones, predicting anger, sensing tension before it even begins. Their silence became a shield, one they carry everywhere, one they rarely put down, because to them, silence means safety. When someone confronts them, criticizes them, or pushes them into a corner, they don't push back, they freeze. Their mind becomes a rushing river of overthinking. What should I say? What if I say the wrong thing? What if this becomes worse? What if they misunderstand me again? And so they choose the safest path. They say nothing. They withdraw. They nod. They pretend it's okay. They swallow the words that burn in their chest because speaking them feels too costly. But this silence isn't apathy. It's exhaustion. Exhaustion from years of being unheard. Exhaustion from explaining themselves to people who never cared to understand. Exhaustion from defending their heart against people who twisted their intentions. People who don't argue back are not quiet because they lack opinions. They are quiet because they lack safe places. Their mind is loud, louder than anyone will ever know. While the world sees calmness inside them as a storm of unspoken sentences. Arguments they play out in their head, things they wish they could say, but never do. They rehearse conversations 100 times before they open their mouth. Sometimes, they prepare a reply, gather their courage, take a breath, and then decide to say nothing after all. Because silence is familiar. Silence is predictable. Silence doesn't betray them the way people do. What outsiders mistake for calmness is actually fear. Not fear of the person they're dealing with, but fear of what conflict turns them into. People who don't argue back often fear their own emotions. They fear becoming too angry, too vulnerable, too exposed. They fear breaking down. They fear their voice cracking. They fear being dismissed, mocked, misunderstood, something they've experienced too many times. So they choose silence. Not because they're weak, but because they're scared of who they'll become if they stop being gentle. They've learned that silence protects them from regret. Words spoken in anger cannot be taken back. And they know this better than anyone. They have been wounded by words. They have been defined by words. They have been silenced by words. And so they fear their own. People who don't argue back also tend to carry emotional scars from earlier relationships, romantic family, friendships. They grew used to being blamed for things they didn't do. They grew used to people twisting their meaning. They grew used to apologizing simply to keep the peace. They grew used to lowering their voice so others could raise theirs. They grew used to choosing harmony over honesty every single time. And somewhere along the way, they internalized a dangerous belief. My feelings are not important. When someone hurts them and they stay quiet, it's not because they don't feel anything. It's because they were taught that speaking up doesn't change anything. Or worse, it only makes things harder. Their silence is a mourning. A slow grieving of all the times they wished someone would ask, "What's wrong? What are you thinking? What do you need? What are you feeling?" But no one asked. No one listened. No one tried. And with each unspoken emotion, they learned to build a wall made of patience and tolerance and quiet suffering. People who don't argue back often use silence to protect themselves from disappointment. When they choose not to fight, it is not because they're okay with what's happening, it's because they've learned not to expect fairness. They've learned not to expect understanding. They've learned to rely on themselves, and themselves only. They've also learned something heartbreaking. Some people argue to win, not to understand. And those who don't argue back, they crave understanding more than anything. So if a conversation turns into a battlefield, they walk away. Their silence becomes a message. I'm not fighting, because I know you're not listening. And sometimes, silence is the loudest truth they can offer. But here's the hidden, darker layer. People who don't argue back often carry a deep, quiet rage. They suppress it, bury it, swallow it whole, and smile through it. But the anger does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes resentment. It becomes distance. It becomes numbness. It becomes that moment when they suddenly stop caring, without warning. When they detach emotionally, physically, mentally, without explanations. When they disappear, not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating fade. People think silence is passive, but it is not. Silence can be the beginning of the end, and when someone who never argues finally stops trying altogether, it means they've reached their breaking point. Their silence becomes a final goodbye, long before they physically walk away. People who don't argue back are also chronic overthinkers. They analyze every word before saying it. They fear causing hurt. They fear failing someone. They fear escalating tension. They fear conflict because conflict feels unpredictable. And unpredictability feels dangerous. They choose peace, even when peace costs them parts of themselves. Some of these people are introverts. Some are empaths. Some are trauma survivors. Some are perfectionists. Some are simply tired souls. But all of them share one thing. Their heart has been mishandled enough times that it now hides behind silence. They don't argue because they don't want to lose people. They don't argue because they prioritize relationships over ego. They don't argue because they value emotional safety over emotional release. They don't argue because they fear conflict more than the feeling of being wronged. They don't argue because their past taught them that speaking their truth comes with consequences. But silence is a double-edged sword. It protects them. It isolates them. It keeps them safe. It keeps them hurting. It preserves peace. It deepens emotional distance. It prevents conflict. It prevents healing. Inside, these quiet individuals exists an ocean of unsaid things, entire emotional worlds they keep locked away. They whisper their pain into journals, into pillows, into late-night thoughts. They practice courage in the mirror. They cry quietly so no one hears. They love deeply but express carefully. They forgive quickly but forget slowly. They endure more than they should because endurance is second nature to them. The psychology behind not arguing back is layered, complex, heavy. It is a mixture of fear, emotional intelligence, survival instinct, trauma, exhaustion, and deep inner softness. But here's the truth. They wish someone understood. They don't want to be loud. They don't want to fight. They don't want to yell. They don't want to break. They just want someone to listen. Someone to make room for their voice. Someone who lets them speak without fear. Someone who treats their silence as a language knot, an absence. People who don't argue back are not emotionless. They are overflowing. They do not avoid conflict because they don't care. They avoid it because they care too much. They avoid it because they feel deeply. Because they overthink consequences. Because peace matters to them more than being right. Because they were shaped by a world that taught them to swallow their pain instead of speaking it. And yet, in their silence lies a strength that loud people rarely understand. A strength that comes from self-control. A strength that comes from restraint. A strength that comes from surviving without external validation. A strength that comes from carrying themselves with dignity, even when everything inside them is trembling. People who don't argue back are not weak. They are warriors of stillness. Fighters of inner battles the world never sees. Masters of emotional endurance. Survivors of unseen wars. Their silence is not empty. It is full of memories, fears, hopes, disappointments, and unsent letters. Full of truths too heavy to say out loud. Full of emotions too delicate for loud places. And perhaps the most poetic tragedy is this: they stay quiet in arguments, not because they don't have something to say, but because no one ever created a space safe enough for them to say it. And so they choose silence, not because they lack a voice, but because they learned, too early in life, that their voice had nowhere to land without breaking.